Hi, I'm Reggie Turner. I'm here with Jim Miller and Terrence Moore. The FlipSide starts right now. Welcome to the show. We are back with you again, and the primary season is now over here in the state of Maryland, and we are pleased to be joined by Senator Paul Corderman joining us tonight. But gentlemen, we want to jump into some of these election results from the primary. Things didn't extend upon last night. We pretty much know the fate of how things are moving. But let's start kind of top down. Obviously, we knew what was going to happen on the presidential side, and no surprises there. Biden on the Democratic side, Trump on the Republican side. They're headed on the collision course for a rematch. But things closer to home, though. If we look at the Senate race, we had a shocker last night. We had Angela Brooks upset David Trone, former congressman of CD6, in convincing fashion.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the shocking part to me. You know, I wasn't as shocked that Angela won. Surprised, yes, because you know as the polls were coming out, she's been gaining ground. The last one was out last week. Kind of had them neck and neck, you know, toss up, which was you got about 4 or 5%, margin of error. But I think it ended up being about 12 points or more.
It was significant.
That was the shocking part. Yeah. Regardless, even if David would have won, if it was that wide of a margin, I think it was extremely surprising.
Well, and you know, I like to follow the money, and apparently $60 million, which is what he spent, can buy you an election.
Yeah.
Which I think speaks well of our.
It does, because you know money is important. Obviously, in elections, as in anything, you need to have the resources to get out there. But I think to your point, you know, money isn't everything. So,
I think my biggest takeaway is the influence of the governor. I don't want to discount that. I believe him throwing his weight behind her. I know early out he came out late last year and kind of said, you know, he was backing her. But over the last couple of weeks, he's put his presence out there.
He was stomping for her.
Absolutely stomped for her. He was out there. He made his presence known. And when you have great approval ratings as a governor, that gives you a level of influence that spills over to whatever candidate you back. And I believe she truly benefited from him standing behind her in this election.
Yeah. How much did she benefit from Representative Trone's gaffes here recently? The Fox News thing, the misspeak.
She benefited greatly from that. When it initially happened, it was kind of muted because her campaign didn't attack it. They allowed folks outside of their campaign to do it. She took the high road, never mentioned it, moved on.
Well played, yes.
Yes, well played, for sure.
But you could see the pressure was mounting because he continued to make mistakes. So after that happened, then there were some forums that he didn't show up at. So then people were saying he was in hiding. Then he had the hospital stay when he missed something there. So there was more scuttle around that. And you know, unfortunately, we haven't been on the air, you know, since we've all been traveling and doing things the last few weeks. But this momentum, this tide was happening. Yep. This was happening, and you could see it, and you could see the frustration in regards to how he was communicating. And like his last-ditch effort was coming out with the representatives from Prince George's County and trying to trot them out, and that backfired. Because one of the folks that spoke to her said, we don't need someone with training wheels or something of that nature, talking in a derogatory way about her, and that turned a lot of African-American voters off. In PG County that he probably previously had won, he turned them off. And you can see from these results, when that election turned, it turned very quickly because so early on, Trone was not even talking about Brooks as his opponent. He was just talking about going against the Republicans, and then he started talking about Hogan. She wasn't even in the picture. And then all of a sudden, when his internal polling told him that there was a problem, then he started negative attacks of her.
Well, and I think, frankly, that notion that he didn't see her as a real candidate probably turned some people off too. I mean, he saw himself as the heir apparent. That was clear.
Absolutely.
At least initially.
And I think there was some pride attached to that. He spent well more money than he needed to in this race. I think he wanted to win command.
But he didn't spend enough.
No, he spent more than enough. It's like when you have a team that you think is going to win a game, And at the end of the game, they start making mental errors. And I think that's where, and the more mental errors they make, it seems to start to snowball. And that's what I kind of seen with him. He started to snowball. It was one issue after another. Then he just got to the point where he just started to foul, right? He just kind of become aggressive and kind of lashing out. The one thing everyone told them not to do because it was going to hurt the party. Because you don't want to walk away from this with a divided party. And he overstepped his bounds that way.
He went scorched earth.
Which showed that he was frustrated, which seemed like blood in the water. And people started to take a step back and go, maybe he won't win. And that was his downfall, if you ask me.
Well, and I think a lot of the analogies being used here from games and sporting events, I think it's exactly right. You spoke about momentum. And, I think that, the congressman, he focused a lot of his, strategy on the polling. Look, polls are valuable, don't get me wrong, but his beginning message was all about looking forward because the first polls came out, had him up by so big. So that was his message. Hey, I'm the one who can win this. The polls say I'm the one who can win this. And Alsbrooks just ran a solid campaign. That momentum started building.
Yep. And
it wasn't just the governor, who was obviously a huge influence.
Absolutely.
But she had, everybody. Everyone from
she
the
had
delegation.
the entire establishment.
The federal delegation, up and down, the Senate president, the House Speaker, on the state level. So many people, basically the Democratic establishment backed her big time. She ran a solid campaign. The time, was right for her, so.
And follow the money, right? We talk about the money, and this was a big primary election about where the money was being spent and people using their money to buy themselves into position. So that was a big kind of narrative across the board that we heard. And then I think his endorsement, and he had quite a few endorsements himself, but what came out about his endorsements and start following the money of him putting money into their campaigns, started to look like he was buying his endorsements. So that pretty much minimized their influence or their impact as well. So I think spending money is what got him in trouble.
Yeah.
Rhetorically, you've got to ask yourself, what does a congressional representative make? 180 a year, 175?
Roughly 170, 180.
Right. Something like that. You got to wonder why somebody spends $60 million to buy a job for 180 a year.
Sure. And look, this isn't the first time. If you go back to his congressional races, he had never spent this much money. But he spent it right over 10 to 13 million on each of his congressional races previously.
When he lost to Jamie Raskin the first time, he spent 15, 16 million. And then he was spending that on average to win. So all told, since 2016, he has spent
right over 100
the stadium. He spent $100 million running for these positions. And it caught up to him because here was the other thing that was kind of the tell. We talked about this the last election cycle when Parrott closed the gap on him. The more you get to know Trone, the less you like him because his percentage of winning was going down every time, even though he was spending more money. And even if he would have won, the party would have been fractured because of how he went after Alsbrooks. And how much more money was he going to spend to try to go against Hogan?
Yeah. Well, speaking of Hogan,
yes,
he was a big winner last night, which that was no surprise to me whatsoever.
I'm still surprised that Robin Thicke got 30% of the vote.
I'm not surprised about that.
Really?
Nope.
Why?
Nope, because I think if you look at
you have the MAGA.
Exactly. Look at the Republican Party. Look at what the Republican Party has been, since Trump.
Yeah.
You have 25, 30%. That's pretty much the standard that are far
MAGA,
right, MAGA,
robust.
Exactly, and that's that vote. And that's who Thicke went after. We all saw his advertisements. I'll stand with Trump.
I'll stand with Trump. We're going to build the wall.
That was his message.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the same percentages that Dan Cox went after. It's that group of the party, of the Republican Party, is about 30% roughly. And so I was not surprised at that at all.
Were you surprised that Dan Cox didn't do any better?
I was surprised at that. I thought that race was going to be a little bit closer.
Yeah, I did too.
Back to the Hogan thing, what I do want to say, and I'm curious about going forward as we go into the general, we talked about the Democratic Party.
Yep.
And the Democratic Party does a much better job of coming together and uniting after elections. Say what we want, we just talked about Trone. He came out last night, he made a point when he spoke, to say, hey, look, we got to come together, we got to be united on this. you know, things
Did-
of that
did
nature.
Ficker do
failed.
that?
He failed last time with that. That looked disingenuous because he wouldn't even mention her
He
name.
wouldn't. Yeah.
So that
Did he
didn't-
do a my opponent thing?
Yeah.
yeah. He did, yes.
It was kind of the generalities and just his body language and everything it wasn't good.
Yeah.
But I didn't see if Ficker gave a concession.
I didn't see Ficker's. I saw Hogan said a few things. I don't know if Ficker did or not.
I didn't see
Well, what I was
anything.
getting at is that 30% that voted for Ficker.
Will they come
Will they
home?
vote for Larry Hogan?
Yeah.
That's the question.
I believe they will. I believe in that party, they're going to vote for the Republican they don't like rather than a Democrat.
Well, see, the concern within the party is will they vote at all?
Will they vote it? Will they sit it out?
Or they skip that one?
Too
They'll-
patriotic
they'll-
not to.
Well, they'll vote for Trump. We know that voter. we know that voter's going to come out and vote for Trump. Right?
Yeah.
So we know that. But as they go down ballot,
But
are they going to skip
as
it over?
close as the Senate race might be this time.
Oh, you would hope. Look, that's what we need. Look, there's no secret here. I'm a Republican. You know, and that's what the Republican Party needs. You need you need to vote for Larry Hogan. You know, if you're a Republican. Now that's the question though of that segment of folks that are that far right, that are the Trump maggots, whatever we want to call them. What are they going to do? That's going to be a big block of voters.
I
Yeah.
seem to have lost a lot of bets on elections here in the last several years, but I would bet that they will,
I like-
because this is an important election. I know every election is the most important election of our life.
Well, I think it's where we live. I mean, West Virginia and Maryland. That's going to decide the country, and that's this general election.
Yeah.
When you talk about the Senate, I mean, it's pretty impactful. This part of we haven't seen that in this area.
And that's the kind of the
much.
excitement for us, right?
Sure.
Because this is a national election in our community.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to draw national attention. It's going to draw national money. I thought Parrott was going to draw in national money in running for CD6 against Trone last year, and it really didn't happen. But obviously you're going to get the national attention.
Yeah,
in
and I
regards
think
to
a
this
lot of
race.
it. Look, it's we talked about the polls earlier. We'll see how those start to play out going forward. I think 2 years ago, even though Parrott was closer, he wasn't polling real well going into it, and
Right.
there was other races nationally they were looking at, things of that nature. And so we'll see how it goes going forward. I still think that CD6 is going to be a tough race for Republican, regardless it was Neil or Dan, whoever came out of that.
Agreed.
Trump at the top of the ticket, women's rights going to be a top of a line issue.
Yes,
that's,
it
that's
is.
a tough issue for Republicans down ballot, and so that's going to be a challenging race.
With all due respect, and I don't know Mr. Vogel, but I'm just going to be happy that every time I turn on YouTube, I don't see a Vogel commercial, because that's
Hey,
all I
look, Joe,
saw.
he ran a great campaign. I will give him credit for that.
He ran
absolutely-
hard.
He ran hard. He was out. I mean, he ran a true, grassroots campaign, raised a lot of money, on his own. Obviously wasn't the result he was looking for, but he's a young guy. He came out of the gate pretty strong, and his future's bright, I think.
I think there's a lot of people down ballot that didn't win, but positioned themselves well for a future.
For the future. Right.
So
and that's what you also have to consider. When you run as well, you want to make sure that you're not making the mistakes that's going to end your political career.
Would you say that our local Hagerstown mayor has set herself up for a future bid?
No, I don't think she had any issues that will stand. I don't think that she got a following or a base that she can carry forward or tap back into in the future. So I think there was some opportunities for her to do so over the last year, but I think it was some missteps from where she went immediately from taking on getting an interim mayor position and immediately going, and now I'm going for, that was a huge jump. And
Going
I think
for the big chair.
Right, when so many local issues needed to be addressed right now.
And unsolved.
And unsolved.
And that
And with-
administration did not address them.
But I
before-
wanted to say this real quick about Hogan, and I got to give him credit. I've never seen anybody watch the polls close, and when the polls close, walk across the stage, say thank you, and keep it going right to bed. Like, he knew it. He knew it. He was like, polls closed, thank you very much, I'm going to bed.
Come on, Yumi, let's go. It's night night.
That's right. Bring on the generals. That's it. That's it.
And then he woke up this morning, and he was gracious to everyone that was on the other side that he was going against. So
But isn't that one of the things that people that love Larry Hogan love about him, is that he is so politically savvy and I think a genuinely nice guy.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's, we've talked about polls here a number of times. I think that's what got him interested. I mean, he had been on the record before saying,
I'm not going to do it.
no interest in the U.S. Senate. I'm not a legislator. But when some of that polling came out showing, say, look, there's a real
There's an
chance that
opportunity
you
at
can
this
do
thing,
this.
yep.
And so we'll see.
It's going to be an
going forward.
interesting race.
Yeah.
The general is going to be interesting.
Oh, it will be a very interesting race. There's no doubt about it.
But we jumped back and forth. We've kind of talked
a little bit about
Senate, and then we
CD6.
jumped in CD6.
Yeah.
But let me set the stage for CD6. So in CD6 on the Democratic side, April McClain Delaney was the runaway winner with that, with
Big time.
39% of the vote. Joe Vogel was second with 26% of the vote, and it was, you know, we talked about this in the weeks leading up to it. It was a two-person race. It proved to be that. Third, you had Ashwani Jain, who had worked in the Obama administration. He ran a real grassroots campaign with no money, pretty much volunteers, you know, shoestring budget, and he proved that his message could resonate to an extent. It was
Unless you win, that doesn't mean anything.
yeah, I get it.
There's always one that tries to do it, and
I
if
get
you
it.
don't take it, then it
And
What
it was
were the
extremely
percentages
low,
there?
low turnout.
What were the percentages again from
So
top down? Delaney.
top down, Delaney was 39%. Vogel was 26.7. And then you had a huge gap.
Right.
Then you had Jane at 8.8.
I think that's the Terrence's point.
Yeah,
Of
and then you had Martinez at 7.
the 13 points is pretty wide between Vogel and Delaney.
Yes,
yeah.
and then everybody else is
Right,
way
and so-
down there. And that's the you know thing in regards to Martinez. I mean, she had 2,500 votes, and the majority of her votes came from Washington County. So she had more of a run for mayor or city council campaign than she did a congressional campaign, because there wasn't much outside of this community where her message resonated.
Like I said before, it was a two-person race a long time ago. I think
Yeah,
we kind of knew that was
We knew
happening.
that, yeah.
And when you see that, you have two options: one, prepare for a political career in the future, or two, drive a message of change.
Exactly.
Use that platform, use that audience to do something good with it that you can take away.
Right.
And you don't want to call it a moral victory, but it is, right?
It is.
Right. As an elected official, as you know, a civil servant, somebody is going to step forward and do best for their constituents and their community. If you can walk away by getting a strong message out or getting some attention to an issue that was otherwise ignored, and do it in a way where you use campaign funding to really get it out there and get that platform, and you may not be pursuing a political career, walk away with a moral victory.
Well, how many do we see run over? And Robin Ficker being a great example.
Oh,
They run
absolutely.
over and over and over.
He spent about $4 million of his own money also.
Yeah,
He did.
You know, and we talk about
And
these
who's
things.
Gluck? George Gluck.
George Gluck. I mean, George. He every cycle he
Yeah,
runs.
he got what, 0.8% or something like
Yeah.
that. But the point is that George Gluck says nobody is going to participate in this race without dealing with my issues, without addressing my issues. And I think that's a perfectly legitimate.
But there's not a lot of money spent for him to do it. It's really his time and
It's just him.
energy.
Well, yes, it is.
To go around the
But he
district
gets
and
his
be,
issues
and
out.
be there. Right, he does. He
He
gets
does.
his issues out. Absolutely.
And I'll give this as well, and I'm sure there was others, but I'll point out, you know, locally, we always struggle with not enough people stepping up into these positions and wanting to run for elections. We keep talking about the rich who come out and, oh, they're wealthy and they're running. You know, there was an opportunity to see someone who may not be at a state economically where there was a benefit to kind of run, right? And what it would cost to run and what you had to sacrifice when you're not wealthy to actually run or don't have the financial backing, which hopefully opens the door for more people to say, you know what, I want to get more involved. I want to be heard. I want to be a part of the process and not have a wealth gap in elected officials and a ability to run as well, because it's not a great paying gig anyway. If you do get it in most cases where you still have to work a full-time job or do something on the other side as well. So I do want to say that if there was anything that can take away as a moral victory, to see, you know, her with her story, at least hopefully say anybody who has a voice, who wants to participate, no matter where you stand economically, you can get into this and be a part of it.
That's the way it should be.
Well, I think one of the hidden winners of this was her campaign, Martinez's campaign manager, Brett Gessert, right? He was able to connect her with this grassroots analytics that raised money around the country. You know, she raised over $500,000 for this race.
Right.
I can't say that it was used effectively, but it did give her headlines and name recognition. So there was a launch point. There was an opportunity there, and not just for her. Like I think, for instance, one of the candidates that did not do very well, but was very effective when she was a part of forums and would be in communities, would be Destiny Drake West.
Yep.
She's a policy expert, but she just did not have the money. And if the money was in the hands of someone with that type of skill set and resume, like I still don't think that she would have beaten Delaney, but it would have been a different race if that money was in different hands.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, not to come to Martinez's defense, but April Delaney is a tough candidate. She's got out of the gate name recognition because of her husband.
That was the conversation even before she got into it.
Even her experience personally, outside,
Right.
she has
a resume.
Yes,
right.
She has the name. She has the resources.
Yep. That's
I mean,
a tough act.
And there's built-in relationships. I think the thing that was surprising to me, Vogel spent a lot of time in Garrett and Allegheny County. So I'm thinking, okay, he's going to tear those up, but she will neutralize that with Frederick and Montgomery County. But she actually beat him in Allegheny County.
I saw that.
So that says to me the inbound relationships that were already there from when her husband was in the seat and the relationships they already had, she was able to walk right back in and secure
the
those.
husband, and part of it you have to question sometimes with the name recognition. And voters go in sometimes. Do they even know it's April Delaney? Sometimes,
Right,
do
right.
They, hey, Delaney, that's the name. You know, I know.
Oh,
Delaney,
okay,
he's been
yeah,
around,
yeah.
Sure, you know,
Yeah.
I know it says April there,
No.
but there are people there's a lot of folks that are out there like that they just, you know, oh, I know that name, who it is.
Happens.
Doesn't realize it's the spouse or a daughter or son or who have you. So
there's a bump in being in alphabetical order sometimes.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
there are some of those, some things that can sway a few votes here and there. Of course,
not to say she didn't work in Allegheny or what have you, but
Right.
but you're right.
But
Vogel was out there
but
much
that was
more.
the point. She
Right.
was not very visible in
Right.
Allegheny
No,
County,
she
and she
wasn't.
still won it.
Right.
So that tells me the name recognition and the relationships that were already established were strong enough. And the thing is about I mean, obviously, on the Democratic side, there's an enthusiasm gap that they're going to face in the general election as well. There was only 34,000. There was only 34.5 in regards to votes cast.
Total votes.
34,596 for CD6.
Okay.
So it was a small number of votes, and 65% of those votes were between two candidates.
but that's a national issue with primaries.
It is.
We know a whole population of people who don't, consider themselves Democrat or Republican don't really get a chance to
well,
participate.
independents, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a large population. People really don't come out as much, even off-cycle elections that aren't part of the generals where the presidents are on the ballot. So, and then you take this time frame. How many people didn't even know it was election day yesterday?
Right.
I bumped into. It was like, oh, I didn't even know my kids were out of school. So I think and what I'm not seeing, I didn't see a lot of voter registration. That should have been pumped out prior to this election. If you want to get your name out there, what better way to go out and help people register to vote? I didn't see half as much as that as we should have seen in the area as well. So I think there's a missed opportunity around what we see in the primaries, and some of that's skewed. And a lot more voters come out that don't come out in the primaries, that show up on election day when we get into November, that are going to really shift some of these numbers. So I got to take all this kind of with a grain of salt now, because there's the voter base that hasn't yet been heard.
Well, and that's the other thing, right? In our state, the independents haven't been invited to the party yet.
Right.
Yep.
They're going to be a big decider in regards to how things move.
Sure, because independents make up probably about a third of the electorate. You know what I mean?
say, yeah.
And so when you talk about the elections, you have your four elections, your two generals, your two primaries, whether it's a presidential or gubernatorial. This election we had last night, that's probably your third out of the four. I'd say the primary and the gubernatorial probably is the lowest turnout of the four. But we're going to go from third all the way to the highest one, which is going to be in November, the presidential general, where you'll get an incredible turnout there. Not just the independents, but your other voters too.
Absolutely.
I mean, Republicans, Democrats, whatever, a lot of people just don't vote in the primary.
I know there's a lot more Democrats in the state of Maryland than there are Republicans, but I was surprised at the total vote count, the disparity. I mean, the Democrats brought far
less.
Bigger. No, they didn't. You better relook at those numbers.
I'm
Or at least on the presidential side.
Oh, I'm looking at kind of the CD6 numbers.
Okay.
Because, and so we don't get too far away from this. So on the Republican side of CD6, there was 41,000 votes cast in that primary. So there was 7,000 more in regards to that. And then on the
That's an interesting number because of the overall Republicans versus overall Democrats. So there's many more
Right.
Democrats.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I heard at my polling place yesterday that they had a new experience that people were coming out and only voting the presidential race, that they were ignoring
Everything
the
else.
down ticket,
really,
which I thought was surprising. And I was told that by 2 or 3 volunteers that people came in and said, I'm only voting for the president.
Which is interesting, not to say that your vote doesn't count in Maryland, but I mean, you're voting for the president of Maryland. I mean, what were we voting on yesterday? I mean, you had Trump and Biden. If you had a Republican ballot, I mean, Nikki Haley was still on there, but she wasn't winning in Maryland.
No.
And you had the Democratic ballot. It was going to be Joe Biden. I mean, that was probably predetermined. So
Yeah.
that
was kind of a waste of coming out.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know I don't know that thought process there.
I think, again, I believe that this campaign was a little different. I don't think, again, not as much door knocking, right? I don't think there was a big, I think this big focus on social media has taken away, the voters that come out and vote.
The retail part of it.
Right. Those are the ones that want you to knock on the door and talk to them and hand them a palm card and have a conversation with them, tell them why they should vote for you, and have something that relates to them. And I don't see that connection. I think a lot of it is starting to be missed because it's so easy to use social media that it's becoming a crutch and taken away from that interpersonal relationship that candidates should be building with their communities. And I didn't see as much as that. And again, which also leaves people for these high-level clickbait kind of politics. You're not telling me policy. You're not telling me what you're running on. You're just trying to get my attention. And I don't care how many likes I give you. We have a problem with engagement on social media, let alone me getting out of my house and coming to vote or sitting in my ballot. So I think the candidates are going to learn from some of this, and hopefully they realize that they have to get back into the community.
But the other thing is
we
we
need
don't
to
have
get back to retail politics for sure.
And our media engagement is poor.
Yep.
I mean, there's not vetting of the resumes of some of these candidates. I mean, just to think, obviously this gravitated towards the candidates, when I think of CD6, with a robust resume. But there were some folks running that were fluffing their resume, and there was really
nobody was asking questions.
Nobody was asking questions. Nobody was
It'll
asking
be interesting to see what
questions.
happens as we move towards the general, because the coverage, in my opinion, by the Herald Mail
It's poor.
was horrible.
What did they even cover it?
Election coverage, really,
I mean,
that I
they
saw.
made it. They
Made an article
made a
here
few
and there, but
profiles.
Years
but that
back,
was it.
you would have inserts. The
Questionnaire.
Sunday
Yeah.
before, you'd have a whole, these are the candidates, here's some
Right.
profiles, here's some
Here's the
position
questions that we
statements.
asked all of
Exactly.
them.
And when
We
you
asked
looked
them
at
two
their
questions.
website last night, you had to choose that you were in Maryland. It didn't just come up. Tell me
Hopefully we'll
about
see
it.
maybe some of that for the general, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
And I'll say this too. Stop all of this loving forum stuff. Let's get back to debates.
Debates.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
Let's put a topic
I
out there.
agree.
Let me hear what you say. Let me hear your response. If the media's not going to question you, allow another candidate to do it.
Yeah, stop these soundbite forms.
Right. Yes. Just everyone
it's
asking the
ridiculous.
same question, and you're saying no. Let's get back to debating tough issues, putting people on the spot. I need to see you battle tested. If you're going to run, especially where we are at economically and where we're at socially in our country right now, I need somebody that I really want to step behind. And I can't say across the board there was anybody. There's people I voted for, people I prefer, but I can't say anybody said anything to me going, that's who I want to represent
Well,
me.
in those type of events, we're dealing with what I call the cosmetic issues, not the real ones.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of putting a bow on this, in CD6 on the Republican side, Neil Parrott won pretty convincingly. He had 47% of the vote, right?
And I thought that was surprising. I mean, I suspected Neil would probably win. I think they were both, we talked about kind of how these campaigns went. Neil, I think, was running on his name recognition from the whole district because he's ran that race
Didn't spend
twice.
a lot of money.
Didn't spend a lot, raised a little bit. I think Cox was really taking that name recognition from the gubernatorial race and see what happened. They never really, neither one of them really did a whole lot of anything.
Right.
I thought it would be closer than it was.
I thought it would be much closer.
But, Neil
And those
came out
two
on top.
guys were 77% of the vote on the Republican side. So it was just a race between those two. But I mean,
Yeah, those two, because then locally we had Brenda Cham.
Yeah.
She ended up being third or fourth, maybe.
no, she
was
was
not
further
good.
down. So the third was
Rocha was in
Rocha
there.
was
Yep.
third with 12%. Fourth was Tom Royals, and he put a lot of
Tom
money
Royals,
in.
that's right, I forgot about Tom.
He self-funded his
Yeah.
campaign, but
Tom
he
was an
didn't-
interesting candidate. Yeah, he
he-
raised some money.
But he didn't get a return on that investment.
Forgot
And
about Royals.
Brenda didn't raise a lot of money. I mean, she beat the street,
Mm-hmm.
but she only got 2.9% of the vote. And I'll say this again: I think Brenda needs to come home and run for something right here in the city of Hagerstown.
Yeah, I agree.
I would agree. Well, and I think it's that same conversation we were talking about the mayor before. Look, I think these are still good candidates. So people are going to be involved in our community, but I think you got to kind of rebrand yourself, reset, so to speak, and take a step back and move forward. So
I would love to see Brenda in education. I think her background,
Yeah,
her
Board of
resume.
Education.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Yeah, I would love to see what she would do in that position and parlay it maybe into something and larger. But I would love to see her what she would do in that kind of role and some of her input as well.
We need to talk about school board. We need to talk about Hagerstown Mayor. We need to talk about the council.
But we're going to need to take a break first.
Yes, we will.
Stay with us. We'll have more local election coverage after the break. Welcome back to the show. We are so excited tonight to have Senator Paul Corderman with us. He's put on his political analyst hat tonight and not legislator, so we are grateful for that. So, gentlemen, let's jump back into this discussion.
Legislator hat along. We just
Yes,
haven't
yes,
seen
yes.
it yet.
We
We're
just
gonna-
haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking earlier when we continued this conversation about the election. Let me say this. I don't know about you guys. I was excited last night. Like,
I was super
I like
excited.
the election process, election night, election. It's just to me, it's an exciting thing. I left my house last week. My wife laughed at me. She's like, She's like, you're so happy, and I was like, it's exciting. I went to a couple different places, watched some of the results come in. I think it's a great part. Great thing that happens in our country. So I was
It
very
really
excited.
is.
Yeah.
And my Knicks. So you couldn't give me a better
No,
night.
no.
It was an awesome night between being on the phone, watching coverage
Yeah.
on TV, hitting refresh on
Exactly,
my computer,
exactly.
texting friends. It was a great night, and it's a great night to see the process. And I think the exciting thing to see was not relative to candidates in the Senate side on the Democratic side, but for an underdog to win when you're outspent 10-1 in regards to Alsobrooks. Like, the underdog can still win in this country, and money
that-
does not always
Right.
win the race.
And that is what made me smile,
Yeah.
frankly, because I like to see that. I'm always for the underdog, and I didn't dislike David Trone at all.
Right.
And I don't know Alsobrooks well. I know her platform from.
Well, we in Western Maryland don't know Alsobrooks well, and that's something that she's going to have to change.
She absolutely is.
Yeah.
So.
But let's jump into the school board race. You could vote for up to 4 of these candidates. I believe 8 of them are going to move through. But let's kind of walk through where the top candidates. So the number 1 was the incumbent Peter Bickford. He had over 9,000 votes. Stan Stauffer, also an incumbent, had 8,300 votes. Melissa Williams, another incumbent, was 7,600 votes. Next was Charles Burkett. Charles has been knocking at the door of trying to get in.
Ran for commissioner
Ran for county
unsuccessfully.
commissioner, couldn't get in, but then he was appointed, but then he ran again, and he could not get in. Looks like he's positioned himself in better situation here. Victoria Beachley, who had also ran for county commissioners last go around, couldn't get in, so she is kind of put herself in position for the general election. She's there at 5th. And let's see, outside of that, if you guys are looking at the list, do we have?
April.
Well, Zetmeyer, I was asking as
Yes.
far as, because she's an incumbent.
She was right behind Beachley.
She's behind Beach.
Yeah,
she came in at 6th.
she's vulnerable.
Right.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about this particular race, because it is nonpartisan.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically. But my point is that the results that you see here, it's not like the Democrats had a different set of slate of officers or candidates to vote for than the Republicans.
Right.
So is it possible that this carries through unless somebody does something stupid?
And I want to say this too. These aren't the final tallies.
No,
either.
they're not.
There's
This
still
is not
mail-in ballots
certified,
that
right.
still need to come in, and some of these differences, like Victoria Beachley, and it's only ahead from that
And
position
Zetmeyer are like really
by
close.
60,
Yes, they are.
Yeah, by 60 votes, right?
Right.
Yeah,
But-
do we know offhand, 'cause I thought I read an article the other day, how many mail-in ballots they counted before that initial dump? Was it like up to
They
the
were
day before the
counting them
election?
early. They were counting them all
I knew they were
along.
counting them early, and I didn't know if it was like what that time frame
I
was.
don't
I
know.
thought I had heard it was up to the day before the election.
They stopped the day before the election.
But they were going to have them all counted to then, and then, so you would have some,
Right.
but theoretically a lot of them should be in there.
But my point is this: Stan Stauffer was the top winner last election, right?
I
He
think
wasn't up last election.
I mean,
it
well,
was
no,
two
the last
cycles
time
ago.
he ran.
I'm not absolutely sure.
I think that was true.
That was pre my FlipSide
And-
involvement.
Peter Bickford has taken the lead there. I think Peter Bickford's star is rising, in my opinion.
Well,
for
I
good
think an
reason,
interesting
in my
analysis
opinion.
would be comparison of 4 years ago where these people, especially some of the incumbents, where they were 4 years ago to where they are now. Bickford's had a pretty solid following, I think, in this past.
He has,
for a
and
while.
I think he's done good work in that position, in my opinion.
And he's a public figure, right?
is,
Even
sure.
outside of this,
That's
like,
right.
he does good work in the community, across the board. He's known. He MCs a lot of major events, so again, a lot of this is name recognition, whether we believe it or not. It's not always about policy and procedure. I'm not saying that he doesn't have,
But when he talks intelligently, articulate. I mean, in my opinion.
I haven't met a person that didn't. Yes.
Pretty big platform for him every year, right?
I don't know a person that's ever said anything bad about Peter. Right?
Yeah, he's a solid individual in our community.
So,
and I should know this, and I probably should even ask. The school board, how do they determine their president? Because Melissa Williams is the president.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean,
commissioners generally go with the top vote getter.
Top vote getter.
That's kind of a customary.
I think they vote on vote at the school board, but I couldn't swear to that.
They vote on it internally after the election is normally, because I believe that's what Frederick County does with their
and the county commissioners do that also. They vote internally, but they generally respect what the election was. It's kind of a long-standing tradition, so to speak.
Right.
So, anyways, but
so there's been, one of the arguments about school board is that it can be too heavy towards educators, which I firmly believe in. Stan Stauffer is a former educator. Melissa Williams is a former educator. There's others on the board that are not up for re-election this time because they do 4 1 year and then 3 the next year, the next cycle. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think, as in anything, you want to have a balance.
Yeah.
I don't think you want to have all educators. I don't think you want to have all not educators.
No.
I think you need to have a balance, of diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, so to speak. I think you need to have some educators on there, but I think you need to have some other folks on there too.
Yeah.
I think someone with business background is always strong as well, as far as with managing the budget and doing a lot with a little, and having that understanding in those relationships as well. But let's also not forget that school board is getting a lot more attention because of education being so politicized across the nation, right? So
and certainly in the state of Maryland.
Right. You got the whole book burning issue and some of those things that are that come into play. And then you have the blueprint that rolled out, which in year 2 right now is causing some angst and some budgeting questions as well of how we execute and really meet some of the needs for our children with the cost that is going to be associated with it and the lofty goals that are within the blueprint. So I think this is drawing a lot more attention. And again, back to I want to hear what your plan is.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to hear what that's going to look like. How are you going to manage this money? Washington County did get a bump. I think we got an increase, about 4.2% increase in funding from the state this year. One of the few places that did. Overall, it was about 4.3% across the state, but some counties lost money. Some counties did better than others, but Washington County did benefit about a 4.2% increase. What are we going to do with that money? How are we going to get the greatest return on that investment? So, and this is the year to be asking those questions.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, if we remember from last election cycle, all 3 incumbents were chalk. They got right back in. If we're looking at the lay of the land based on how the numbers look right now with some of the mail-in ballots not there, Bickford, Stauffer, and Williams look to be solid, right? Because they're leading 1, 2, 3. But it looks like Zetmeyer is in a little bit of trouble and has some work to do. So it looks like we may have at least 1 new member.
Zetmeyer is only 100 outside 100 votes.
Right. The margins are very small with the numbers.
Yeah. Outside of 100 votes of Beachley.
Beachley, right.
But Beachley's number 5.
Yeah.
She wouldn't get elected. And Beachley,
I mean, there's some work to do to kind of close the margin with Burkett at this point.
Beachley is 1,000 points down,
Burkett,
1,000 votes down.
But we talked about how many people didn't come out and vote right now. So
No,
it's easy to sway any direction. I don't think anybody's truly.
All the independents we talked about, none of them voted. They're
Exactly.
going to make a big impact.
true.
And to the points that Terrence made earlier, some of those points resonate to different folks. Some people want the whole package. They want to talk about the blueprint and the books and materials, but some of them, people, like, they only care about
They're
the blueprint,
single-issue voters.
or they only care about what books are going to be in the library,
Right.
or they only, and so you're going to get
mental
it's a
health
whole different
is
election.
another one as well. You know, so
Well, and I think that's one of the dangers of having too many educators or too many business people, because they could be one-trick ponies
Right.
on either side.
Right.
But, and I also say this as well, just because it's all educators doesn't mean you don't lean on the expertise of your constituents.
Right.
I think we need to do a better job of having more relationship with our business community and professionals, as well as those who are in education, to collectively make change and influence some of these things, because it's not going to be done in-house only. I can guarantee that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think to your point earlier also, and you'll see it, I think particularly in this race here locally, it's become much more politicized, and I think you're going to see that in this race as that goes forward.
Yeah.
Especially that bottom of the ticket. We talk about the Zentmeyer and the Burke and the Beachley. Look, I know it's nonpartisan. They're all Republicans, and I think there's difference of opinions within the Republican Party as far as what level of the spectrum are you conservative or not conservative enough. And if you look at those individuals, I think they're all on different gauges of that spectrum, so to speak. So.
Yeah.
And Beachley has name recognition, good or bad, depends on your perception, right? That Beachley is a community name.
It is,
right?
for sure.
So.
And we didn't go all the way down the list, but Ashley McCusker is also over 8%. So that's another name that's kind of in that margin.
She had some signs out. I'd say of everyone that's on there, I saw a good many of her things out and about. Not that signs mean anything by any means, but people weren't doing a whole lot in primaries.
Right.
Stauffer had some stuff out there. I saw.
Kiefer had a lot of things out there. I did see a lot of Kiefer signs.
Did you see a lot of Kiefer?
Yes.
Okay.
And some of the more rural areas at that, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. So, gentlemen, let's move on. Let's go to Hagerstown. We obviously, with Mayor Martinez, with her ambitions for CD6 that didn't come to fruition, that left an open position where we knew once she announced last year that we were going to have a new mayor. And right now the two contenders are Bill McIntyre and Stephen Schuette. There's been a few forums around the community that they've participated in, but both of them knew that they were going to move on to the general. But the initial snapshot of these two was a pretty convincing move.
One-sided.
Yeah, for Bill McIntyre, who gained 63% of the vote, and Schuette got 36%. Jim, what say you?
I think you said it all. I mean, I know both these gentlemen. I think they both have very positive qualities. I was a little surprised that Stephen Schuette didn't get more, because he's been a figure around when in his days at the telephone store, the Sprint store. He's been very active in the chamber, and I like him. He's a good guy. Bill McIntyre obviously has name recognition because of his wife.
Ex-wife.
The ex-wife.
And their company.
And their company. So, yeah, in terms of qualifications for the job, I don't know.
You had two small business owners, right, that were competing against one another. So let's say that, let's call that a wash. Both of you are small business owners. Both of you have.
Bill's a business owner. What does Steven do?
Yeah, Steven, he's not a business
broadband, right?
owner.
He's like the GM there or something. Business minded though.
Right.
Yeah.
He ran kind of the franchise of that cell phone
T-Mobile
store that he did have in town. So he was kind of over that. So I'm kind of putting that, kind of tie that together.
Gotcha.
So you had that, but my issue is you had the same group of people. I like to call them the Hager 100, right? So you have the same group of people who have that influence here locally, and you were competing in that same area. Neither one of you really branch out into a demographic outside of that chamber, business, local, downtown community. I can't say their names resonate outside of that kind of area, right? So you put people in a position where they had to choose, and overwhelmingly, you see who they chose.
Yeah.
Right? So, I know Schuette won Businessman of the Year for the chamber. I think that hurt him more than anything else, because I don't believe that resonated well with,
Well, especially when you go from winning,
business
he won the
year.
Young Business Professional, and then the next year you come back.
And who you competed against in that as well was also,
Yeah.
taken to some kind of, because when you win, someone lost, right? So, that's a friction there. That's a conflict there, right? Of who, you had from the medical center and the medical school, a representative that was in that list. You had Ben Spettin, who was here when you talking about the ballpark. So you took a win from some profile people within that Hager 100 kind of group, right? And again, it's more than 100. It's just kind of branded them. So I think they're fighting in a small, finite population for the same votes.
Right.
And I believe the only way for Schuette to really kind of take over, because this group has spoken, is to find a new demographic. You got to resonate outside of this.
Yeah.
You got to find a different population that you can call your own, because this population is you're going to take a loss.
I think the other thing that I've seen from the outside looking in, Schuette is kind of the favorite of the old regime.
Now, what old regime?
You know, he's kind of the chosen one of former Mayor Emily Keller. He's kind of the favorite of Delegate Grossman. And for Delegate Grossman, you know, the two horses she picked in the congressional and Senate races both lost. So I don't know if that type of endorsement is anything you need. I agree with Terrence. He needs to find a new demographic, and he needs to show that he is his own individual, and that in him governing, it won't be business as usual, and that he is going to be his own man, and he's not going to be influenced by those that still want to have their thumb on what happens in City Hall.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think just to that point also, and what you both said, to me, when I look at those numbers, it's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
To both of them.
Yeah.
I think it's a wake-up call
got some work
for
to do.
Shooty of like, all right, this might be a little bit more work I need to put into this than I thought I needed to do to go down those avenues and branch out to those individuals that you spoke of. And I think if you're McIntyre, it's a wake-up call of, look, don't sleep, okay?
Right.
You know, because Steve's going to work. I'm sure he will work. And so Bill needs to be working just as hard to keep his own momentum going.
And finding new
and not get
constituencies.
complacent, exactly,
Yeah.
and reach out in those same avenues that you spoke about as Steve needs to do. So, I think it's going to be obviously an interesting race going forward.
I put this question in, Reggie and I have debated back and forth. If Mayor Martinez had decided to run for mayor against these two, where do you think she would have landed?
I think she would have been second.
I think she would have been first.
Really?
I agree.
I think she would have been second.
Yeah.
Why do you say second? Why do you say first?
Well, one, you're going to have three people that's going to cut the vote up a little bit more. And I think she's the incumbent. Part of her challenges on the congressional side we just talked about before, where she's more known more locally, I think it's her base. I mean, I think, again, kind of rehashing the conversation we had earlier, she took a step too far going to congressional. I think she should have stayed too fast, should have stayed local, ran for a term. I mean, she did very well when she ran for city council 4 years ago, as far as what her total numbers were. She never ran for the mayor's seat, and so I think she probably should have done that. Yeah. I just think it would have been. I think I think she would have came in first.
I think it would have been challenging because
right now. I think it'd be her, McIntyre, and Steve. I think you'd see a McIntyre-Martinez general election.
I believe they would have cannibalized each other. I think that going back to what it's saying, that same demographic, and I think she resonates outside in a wider base. You know, I think this population they would have cannibalized one another for a degree, but outside the wider base,
right.
I
She's
think
touched a lot of those other individuals, those other segments of the city that these two individuals have not reached yet.
I'll concede that. I mean, the only thing is I just would have had it flip. You would have had Martinez 1 and McIntyre 2.
A close 1 and 2.
Yeah,
right.
I just would have had McIntyre 1 because I just think that the people that have concerns about the direction of the city outside of the growth that we're seeing, they aren't the vocal people that you're going to see on social media.
But also, and I mean to cut you off.
No.
That's not who voted yesterday.
Yes, exactly.
That's who's going to vote in the general election.
Yeah.
I think what you had voted yesterday, it's the opposite of that. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. So basically, you're going back to a conversation. Yesterday was the popularity vote.
Right.
But the hard votes are coming when we get to November.
Yeah.
And then the more diverse voting that comes up in November as well. Again, you have a whole population independent that comes out, and you have a large demographic of voters that only vote every 4 years.
And just the overall turnout is going to be so much more. And the presidential turnout is just going to be night and day as far as who comes out.
I think where the community, so we can all agree that our media presence in regards to how we cover these things has been poor, right?
Except for the flip side.
Yeah. I mean, the flip side, those guys with Cronkite, those guys are on it. But I think the advantage of this election cycle than 2020. 2020 was a popularity contest where everyone was able to hide on social media and a few forms of a live stream. Because we were in the midst of COVID and it was really disjointed in regards to how campaigns ran. And we were kind of in a weird place as a country. We were going through George Floyd and all these things in the mood of the country.
Mail-in votes.
Mail-in votes. Yeah. So I think that this one's going to be different where there's going to be a lot more engagement with these candidates where they're going to be put to the test to really show and put their best foot forward. But kind of moving into the city council race. So in this particular race,
I just want to point out what you said about moving forward. I think what's going to be a big decider is that stadium. Because we're finally have a place where there's going to be a consistent congregation of constituents that we're going to see daily at times, weekly, and you have to be present. There's no reason for you not to be present when you have that many people that can gather downtown at any given night and you be absent from that. So I think this is going to put a lot of people in a position where they're going to have to show up and be forced to deal with people who challenge them in the hallways, in the restrooms, and in the ballparks.
Couldn't you
where
say
they have
the
to answer
same
the
thing
questions.
about the Maryland Theater?
No.
Why not?
I think unfortunately the demographic of the Maryland Theater changes based on the show.
Okay.
So you have people that come in occasionally. There are some people who may not even frequent it. But when you have such a large forum where you can put 5,000 people with the overarching of a baseball stadium and some of the activities that happen around it, that you may not even have to like baseball, and you can show up to the stadium and have a good time and do a family outing, or your company is bringing everybody there for you because they're picnics and they're sold out in some cases there, you're forced into that venue. And it's going to be hard to hide, as you mentioned in some ways on their social media, when so many people are gathering publicly.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No. I appreciate your analysis, but we're gonna keep this thing moving because you guys get long-winded. You know how you guys are. But moving on to the city council race, where you could vote for up to 5. There were 11 that were vying for spots, so only 1 didn't make it. Journey Martinez, Mayor Martinez's daughter, was the low person with only 4.4% of the vote, so she did not make it through. Everyone else did. So if we want to kind of go in the ranking, in the pecking order of who would city council be based off of where we are right now, Christian Alshire is the leading vote getter at 16%. Tiara Burnett was at 12%. Matt Schindler was at 10%. Peter Perini was at 9.7%. And then Sean Flaherty would have been the 5th. He would have been the new council member based on where this looks at 9.1%. So that's how it looks. But then you still have 5 others that will make the final cut and have an opportunity. And that will be Erica Bell, Caroline Anderson, Mark Bell, Stacey Michaels, and Rich Owens. Yep. Yeah. And Stacey Michaels and Erica Bell are kind of vying for that 6th spot to get there. So they are, they're within just a few votes of each other. But it's going to be very interesting as the community gets to know these candidates and there is some vetting of their resumes.
Yeah. Can I just say, and I have not a lot of facts to back this up, but my opinion is, what I see is I'll see politicians when they come on the scene and their star will rise and then they reach a pinnacle and then they drop off. That has not happened to Christian Alshire. How long has he been a city councilman? And I know he had a stint there momentarily as a commissioner, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean, he seems to be at the top of the vote getters in the council almost every time we vote.
Like him or loathe him, he's the policy expert in the building. He doesn't really get into the theatrics of it.
He doesn't.
I mean,
he's smart though.
Yeah,
he is smart.
Sometimes
and I
too
don't
smart.
agree. Well, I agree with that. And I've had arguments with him through IMs on Facebook. He'll post, somebody who asks a simple question, and he'll post something that's 2.5 miles long.
But these debates in regards to water, sewer, and things like that, you want him in that conversation.
Oh, yes, you do.
Honestly, I think we're thinking too hard. I think.
Oh, you think the A?
No, not just that. I'm just saying, the movement in that position, I think we're shocked by over the last 8 years, right? So over from 2016 to 2000, because of people either retiring, stepping out, moving up in politics as well, those seats have become more and more vacant. Prior to that, I don't think we've seen as much movement probably as we've seen in a long time. Yeah. So I think running, it's hard to beat the incumbent, right? In this seat, right? Because there's name recognition there. And people don't pay attention as much and understand what city council really means. I think we've seen a lot more of that over the last 8 years. So we have an expectation of, oh, everyone's going to be gone. There's going to be a new shift. And everybody, I don't think that's realistic. Mm-hmm. I really believe that, unfortunately, in this position, and sometimes, if you have the seat, it's yours to lose.
The data does show that, though, and not to cut you off, Jim, but the data does show that, right? Because Schindler could not win, but now it looks like he's in the safe zone. because he's had an opportunity to sit in the seat.
Well, and you could say the same thing about Peter Perini.
Exactly. Peter
Right.
Perini couldn't win.
How many
See, I'm going
elections?
to go the opposite of that.
Okay.
You think the general was going to be different?
Exactly. We keep talking about how much different the general election is than the primary election. And Schindler and Perini, rejected might be too harsh of a word, but they were rejected by the voters in the past.
Yes,
that
they
was
were.
part of my concern when they were initially appointed in the first place.
Right.
And so now they've been put in there. So yeah, are they incumbent? Sure. They're
It helped them in the primary, in a low turnout primary.
In a low turnout where no one was really doing anything as far as all 10 or 12 of them. I think Sean Flaherty was probably doing the most out there. We talked about earlier about knocking doors.
Right.
I know that individual has been knocking doors and doing that door-to-door, retail politics that we talked about before, which I think kind of put him in that position. But the other four, I think they're just, they're four incumbents. Two of them, though, were appointed. I think that thing's going to be wide open coming to general election. And in between now and then, to your point, where do people stand? Where are they on these issues? That's what I want to see. Again, you said it earlier, we were talking about one of the things. These forums are like, we want to have people together and have a conversation, but let's debate. Let's talk about the issues.
That's exactly
Let's talk about public safety. Let's talk about water and sewer. Let's talk about fire and rescue. Let's talk about all these things.
Yeah.
And where do you stand on them?
Because there's a lot of issues.
Oh, yep.
But we need some true vetting of resumes too.
That too, absolutely.
I mean, you have to, because here's the thing, for me, if you aren't financially solvent as an individual, I don't want you managing. I don't want you having a
$150 million budget.
Right. That's just not going to work.
If you never touch that kind of money, right, or understand how to fiscally be responsible of that money comes into play. But even some of these issues, like if it wasn't for staff, would any of these council members really understand at times what's truly going on? What the impact? Can I really sit down and have a conversation about water and sewage with each one of the council people and they really explain it to me in a way as a constituent that I trust that they're making the best decision?
If you watch city council meetings, when we're talking about entertainment and what's happening around the community and what ribbon cuttings we went to and what proclamations you gave, you have full participation.
Yep.
But you start talking water and sewer and some of these other issues, like the city still has not come clean to the community of saying how they're going to pay for their indoor turf arena. These things are not articulated. I mean, even, when they put it out there, they says, well, it's the city and their partners. Well, who are your partners? Your partners is a taxpayer because you didn't get more money from the state. And these are things that are just not explained. And I know that people aren't paying attention and we don't have a robust media that's covering those type of things. But there's an opportunity, though, with the different forums that can happen today that are going to be live to challenge and to ask these pertinent questions.
Even opioid money, right?
Yes.
The opioid lawsuit, that's coming to the forefront across the country, right, of how some of these municipalities are actually using this money and how it was intended based on the lawsuit. And the fact that you can't go back and get any more once it's spent. Right, so that was part of most of these agreements in these lawsuits against these large pharmaceutical companies. That once you've sued, they've paid out. You can't come back and sue again.
Right.
So if you don't use the money responsibly to take care of the opioid crisis and some of the issues that you sued for, and you misuse the money for infrastructure or something else, how does that play out long term?
You mentioned about not following. Well, let me tell you something that is being followed very closely. Our producer is following our timeline, and we are out of time.
Are you kidding me?
We are out of time.
We were just getting started.
We are just getting started, but we're out of time on the show. So take us out, Ray.
Oh, man. Well, that is all the time that we have for tonight. We hope that you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and send us your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That is feedback@theflipsidetv.com. But most importantly, join us again next week for another episode of The Flip Side.